I was always a fan of Alfred Hitchcock movies since I was a kid, but since I was 10, give or take a couple years, I only got to see what my parents were watching, so I've never seen Psycho until now. Hard to believe since it's not only one of Hitchcock's most well-known movies, but also one of the most influential horror movies of all time. It was considered to be the first movie in the slasher subgenre, and the rest of this month will show its influence throughout the decades and connect them all in weird accidental ways. Like many groundbreaking and untested formulas, Psycho was initially met with mixed reception by critics, before eventually going on to be not only a commercial success well beyond expectation. Adjusted for inflation, it cost about $7 million to make but brought in over $437 million, as well as nearly universal critical and popular success. Fastest critical hindsight turnaround ever. Initial criticisms were mainly about the reliance of what would now be considered jump scares as opposed to Hitchcock's usual psychological horror, as well as an unsatisfactory ending, which is now a staple of not only slashers but horror in general, albeit Psycho's ending lends uncertainty and creepiness rather than an excuse to leave room for sequels, which Psycho got 3 of literally over Hitchcock's dead body. Being an arrogant narcissist, Hitchcock used his new screw you money to buy $15 million 1960s dollars of stock in MCA, which owns Universal Studios, NBC, and now Comcast, making him his own boss, though there would still be some studio interference in later productions. Meanwhile, back at the plot, Psycho is unusual for Hitchcock in that it's a morality lesson, unlike most of his other films, which are tragedy of errors. North by Northwest, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Rear Window, and so on. They're all about a situation that the leads have gotten wrapped up in because they had a mix-up with their bags or saw something they shouldn't have. In Psycho, the circumstances which lead Marion Crane to the Bates Motel and the events that follow are entirely her fault. Her boss entrusted to her to deposit $40,000, that's about $350,000 in 2020 money, and she steals it because she can't marry her boyfriend while he is in debt. She drives from Phoenix, Arizona to Bakersfield, California without stopping until she starts to fall asleep and pulls over to the side of the road. The part before she gets to the hotel, I think, is the scariest part of the movie, from her boss seeing her in a place where she shouldn't be, to driving throughout the rain, paranoid and unable to see, eventually having to stop the car. This is followed by the cop checking on her, rightfully becoming suspicious.
Is anything wrong?
Of course not. Am I acting as if there's something wrong?
Frankly, yes.
And creepily following her for hours until she swaps her car for one with California plates, pays the whole difference in cash, in hundreds no less. This is super suspicious and the kind of thing you couldn't get away with today. But with this, the cop that has been following her drives off for some reason, even as he gives her one last, now completely justified gaze of suspicion. While not a plot hole, it's something that kind of breaks my suspension of disbelief, and it could have been constructed better. Maybe their meeting point could have been her blowing a tire instead of falling asleep, and while she needs his help, she acts suspiciously. Then stopping at the motel would have been a more natural action since she has the money and is dead tired, no pun intended. I doubt a woman in her generation would sleep at the side of the road by herself, and it seems more like a railroad to get her to the motel than something that's in character. Norman is as wonderfully creepy as his motel is. On the outside, everything seems normal, albeit a bit awkward.
And over there.
The bathroom.
Yeah.
And the more time you spend, the more you want to leave. The house looms over like a monster slowly reaching out over as the plot thickens. The inside of the house is even scarier due to the suspense of someone being around the corner at any moment, and the camera work making it seem like a twisty turning maze using the stairs. The shower scene is one of the most iconic scenes in movie history, and everyone's probably seen at least a parody of it. The soundtrack has the same significance. It's also been the subject of rumors and speculation for 60 years now, with people saying that there was or wasn't a body double. Whether Hitchcock filmed the scene himself or delegated it, since he's a known perfectionist, it's hard to believe he filmed every scene except that one. and getting it approved for viewers was a mess. At the time, ratings were simply a yes-no rather than the tiered systems that are used worldwide now. Weirdly, it has since bounced back and forth between a PG and an R rating in the US over the decades as morality policing has shifted. Anyway, some of the ratings boards said that they saw nudity, others didn't. Hitchcock waited a bit and changed nothing, submitted again, and the members reversed their positions. When they could see something before, they now saw nothing, and when others could see nothing before, they now saw it. Norman's second murder with the detective seems a bit cheesy, with an obvious backdrop and camera track and pulley device to show him falling down the stairs. It's one of the few actual faults of the movie, and a fairly minor one at that. At that point, the swamp is getting pretty full of cars. The final characters split up to search the creepy, seemingly abandoned house, and Marion's sister Leela finds what's left of Mrs. Bates, while Norman changes into his murder clothes. The shock of Mrs. Bates' condition is compounded by Norman immediately bursting into the room with a knife. It's terrifying knowing Leela is defenseless, but Sam shortly comes in to save the day and concludes the case of the Bates killings. As psychiatrists explain Norman's personality to take over, he's left in the room alone with a creepy smile, saying he literally wouldn't hurt a fly. But there's just something wrong about the scene. It's one of the few "the killer's still alive" endings that I like, both because of the presentation and because it wasn't meant to be a sequel hook. It had a sincerity to it that the typical open ending doesn't. That said, there are a few problems I have, especially with the first half. Like I said, the plot seems railroaded rather than Hitchcock's usually perfectly crafted narratives. Next, there's a scene when Norman goes out to the house and Marion hears Norman arguing with his mother. Either he's arguing very loudly with himself for no reason, or it's a case of Marion being an unreliable narrator, which might be the case. She was convinced her boss was onto her while they drove past each other. She was hearing voices of people she knew while she was driving.
Well, I ain't about to kiss off $40,000. I'll get it back, and if any of it's missing, I'll replace it with her fine, soft flesh. I'll track her, never you doubt it.
And the cop following her could have been a coincidence or a series of different police that just happened to all overlap with her route. But I think that's really overanalyzing it. In any case, Marion is the only one to hear Mrs. Bates' voice. She's also the only one who sees the silhouette in the window moving. It fits the internal rules, but just barely. For example, it's pretty obvious that the silhouette in the window is just Norman. Nitpicking aside, it's easy to see how Psycho developed an entire subgenre. For its time, it pushed boundaries and did new things. It focused mostly on Norman and his point of view rather than his victims. This would be something that would inspire movies like Halloween, which I'll be looking at next week, and Friday the 13th. I liked Psycho, but it's not one of Hitchcock's best, and not something I think I'll be watching over and over like others I mentioned earlier. That's it for this week, and if you like this video, I'd like you to like it. You can see more horror movies by subscribing. I'll be reviewing Halloween next week, as I said earlier, and I'll be reviewing one movie each week this month. Since I have to deal with copyright problems with almost every video, especially this month, plus because of violent content, most horror month videos are ones I don't make any money from, despite them being my favorite ones to make. Please consider subscribing to my Patreon or Subscribe Star, even at the lowest tier. Every dollar counts, especially when I'm literally making nothing for all my work. Thanks for listening to my sales pitch. There's a reason I didn't go into marketing, and I'll see you next time.